And we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second episode in our series on the Chandler Pride YouTube channel called the Chandler Pride Project. My name is Jude, and I am super excited today to welcome David Boyles to the stream.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jude. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to do this.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So for those of you that might not know me yet, my name is Jude Schroder. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am 23 years old from Chandler. I am a, transmasculine, non-binary person. I'm pansexual also. And I'm an activist, recent graduate from ASU. And I'm super excited to welcome David today. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Boyles. I use he, him pronouns. I am a current Chandler resident and longtime resident of the area. I grew up in Queen Creek, but I'm a Chandler Unified School District alum all the way through. I graduated from Hamilton High many years ago. Almost many years as you've been alive, not quite, but pretty close. And yeah, I'm a teacher at ASU. I'm an instructor in the writing programs there, and then also activist in the community. I am one of the co-founders and current board president for Drag Story Hour Arizona. I'm also one of the founders and on the board for Virtual Arizona Pride. I've worked with Glisten, some other organizations in the area. A lot of my work tends to focus particularly on LGBT youth through Story Hour and Glisten and projects like that. And yeah, I'm just super excited to be here to talk about LGBT inclusion, particularly in Chandler. Someone who's been around this area for a long time, and has seen it change, and hopefully will continue to change for the better.
Definitely, that's what we're all about. So we're gonna have just a nice conversation today, talking about some of your work. But I want to start off with asking you, what was the catalyst for your involvement with the LGBT community?
Yeah, I saw this question on the list of questions a little earlier when we were talking, and I don't know, it's hard to say. I've been involved in a lot of ways for a long time. I've been around the community in many ways, but I think this particular involvement, that I've been involved the last few years, I've gotten very involved and become, a lot more visible. Really started with Glisten, and I moved away. I was not in Arizona for quite a few years. I moved back here in 2015. And that's really when I learned about Glisten and what it was. I was not really familiar with it before. I think I was vaguely aware that it existed, but didn't really know what it was. And I came back to Arizona. I became aware of Glisten Phoenix, which was very active and much more active than the Glisten chapters in the places that I had been. Like I was before this living in Tampa. I'm not even sure if we have a Glisten there because I'd never, was not aware of it. If we did, it was not very active. But the Phoenix chapter is very active. And as I said, my focus has been largely on working with queer youth. And I think that comes first and foremost from my work as a teacher, teaching at ASU. I teach, and I have taught for a long time, first year writing. So I work with first year students primarily. And I've seen a lot of first year queer students who come from very supportive backgrounds. People had supportive parents and supports in place, and come to ASU were already out, very involved in the community, very sure of who they were. And then you have other people, other first year students who come from not supportive backgrounds, and you see them in that first year kind of figuring out who they are and and coming out and things like that. And so I think that was one of the big catalysts to get involved with Glisten, was trying to build those supports. And as someone who is quite a bit older than you, from grew up in the 90s in Chandler and in this area with very little representation, without queer role models, without queer representation, without a GSA in my school, without anything like that, with any acknowledgement really that queer youth existed. I wanted to change that, and I've seen the way that it has changed. I found out when I got involved with GLSEN that Hamilton, my old high school, now has one of the largest GSAs in the area, which is amazing. And wanting to build that support, because now what I see is in those supports for LGBT youth, when I was growing up, more or less didn't exist. Now they do, but are very uneven. So if you're in a particular communities, you have a lot of support, other places don't. And then kind of one thing just kind of led to another. Like I just got involved with GLSEN and started showing up, tabling at events, and doing the trainings and the GSA visits and things like that, which I really loved. And then it was at a GLSEN event that I met Michelle Miranda Thorstad, who became one of my partners in Drag Story Hour. She is a librarian who had done a story hour in Gilbert and had a lot of problems with it, basically. And I was the one that was like, why don't you just start a nonprofit organization on your own, do them on your own, separate from the political structures. And so I helped her with that, and I became involved. Then Virtual Arizona Pride grew out of that. Virtual Arizona Pride happened last year after Phoenix Pride was canceled, because of the pandemic. And it was, canceled this very short window because it's first weekend of April. Everything happened, mid-March last year when everything shut down. And there was a big group Zoom call of organizations being like, we should do something virtually. And a lot of people were saying, yeah, but there's not enough time. Who's going to organize it? And somehow I became the one organizing it because I'm the one that, steps up and does stuff. And so we did that first event. We then started doing monthly events after that, as the pandemic went on. And also as we discovered, there's a lot of need for that, for those kind of virtual events, even separate from the pandemic, because we had people, again, queer youth who are in unsupportive households who can't come to an in-person Pride event, or in rural communities, people with disabilities, a lot of people who, even pre-pandemic, would not be able to come to an in-person event, really appreciated our virtual programming. And so we've been talking about ways to, keep it going through the pandemic, but then also even after that, when in-person events come back, to still make sure we have these accessible virtual options as well. So yeah, that's a long explanation. But yeah, there was no sort of one event or big plan. It's just sort of one, you do one thing, it leads to the next, it leads to the next.
That's awesome. That was a great overview, I think, of a lot of the different things that you've done in terms of your activism and education within the LGBT community. And I mean, I know that like I'm of a different generation, but a lot of the things that you said about not having as much of a community or support in Chandler, I think that was still something that was a part of like my experience growing up. And I mean, there was progress in between, but like there was a GSA in my high school. I just didn't know that we had a GSA. And there weren't that many out LGBT students. I think because there was still a stigma against being LGBT in my schools growing up. So that's one of the reasons why I want to do this work, is to try to make sure that students in Chandler, students in Arizona have that kind of community, have access to resources. Because I think that, if I had just like more support or more resources, I would have come out sooner. Like, I mean, I know that I'm young still, and it's great that I've been able to come out and transition and all of these things at this age. But yeah, I think that just having access to that stuff even earlier on would have been fantastic. So I want that for all of our LGBT youth. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm an activist for LGBT issues. So But yeah, so let's go back to one thing really quick. So with Glisten, just for anyone who's not familiar with Glisten, I put the link to Glisten Phoenix in the chat, so you can check them out. They're a great resource. But David, could you describe a little bit more about what they do, and yeah, just what Glisten is?
Yeah, Glisten is a fantastic organization, and yeah, like you mentioned, there was a GSA, you didn't know about it. Glisten, same thing. Glisten has been around actually for quite a while. They were founded, I think, in the early 90s. So they existed when I was in high school too, but again, didn't know about it. They are an organization that works specifically to support LGBT youth in schools and K through 12 education. And there's a couple big pillars that they do. The big one is the GSAs. And if you're not familiar, GSA originally stood for Gay Straight Alliance. Groups have now gone to changing it to things like Gender and Sexuality Alliance to get away from that kind of binary terminology. Again, it's a product of the early 90s when GSAs first started. But yeah, there the groups on campus in high schools and now even sometimes in middle schools for LGBT students and allies. And we work to support those organizations. Back in the pre-pandemic times, we would do visits to them, which I did, which were really awesome. We put together support packages for them of just sort of stickers and t-shirts and resources like that. We work with a lot of different GSAs around the whole valley, and the GSAs serve different purposes in different schools. In some of the more outlying suburban areas, the GSA is is the safe place to come. They tend to be very small. They tend to be kind of a support group for people who want to come and be around other queer allied students. And then we have in some of the bigger schools these bigger GSAs that actually are involved in activism and lobbying the school board for more inclusive policies and things like that. And so we kind of meet all the GSAs where they're at. Glisten also does teacher trainings where we are brought into schools to work with teachers on inclusion issues. There are a lot of different programs that we do. Some, again, it's just a basic, kind of almost like an LGBT 101, which some districts and teachers need. And then others are more specific around, trans issues or things like that. Also lobby and work with school boards around, inclusive policies, for trans students, involving sports and bathrooms and, all those kind of things. Bullying, is another big thing. Bringing awareness of bullying, trying to get school districts and schools to adopt anti-bullying policies that specifically include, LGBT harassment. This is a big thing that happens a lot, is, the sort of, casual homophobia that you will hear in middle school and high school. Teachers will look the other way on it. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with that, with having been in school, how that works. And so we argue that we need policies in place that specifically detail these things so that we can root it out in the schools. So yeah, so that's what Glisten does, kind of working all those areas to support LGBT students and just inclusive policies in general in K through 12.
That's awesome. I think it's super cool that that's where you got more involved in education and activism, and Glisten is awesome. So if you weren't aware of them before, go check them out. We got a question in the chat asking us to talk more about Drag Story Hour and specifically how you choose the books that you will read. So if you want to tell us what Drag Story Hour is and then answer how you choose the books, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. So Drag Story Hour. And the concept of, so the more common name is Drag Queen Story Hour. That's what the national organization is called. We in Arizona, when we incorporated, we specifically dropped the queen from the name because we have drag king performers, we have non-binary performers. So we're trying to get away from that language. But yeah, so Drag Queen Story Hour started in San Francisco in, I believe, 2015. The author Michelle T basically came up with the idea. She was working with a nonprofit there. And basically the idea was to create a library story hour that was specifically inclusive for, LGBT families, whether that's, families with, LGBT parents or, LGBT kids, trans kids, those kind of things. Because, these story hours, even in a place like San Francisco where Michelle T was, were often, not inclusive. She talks about how she would go, as a, same-sex couple, her and her wife would take their kids and feel like outsiders. And so they wanted a specifically inclusive space that gave, these positive queer role models, queer representation to the kids. And that idea grew from San Francisco, went to New York, and then started spreading all over the country. And then, like I said, Michelle, my partner, one of my partners in Drag Story Hour, did an event at one of the county libraries in Gilbert that had a lot of controversy around it, and then led to us starting Story Hour. And in the books, I'm not the expert on that. Michelle's the one with the library expertise. She's the one who puts the programs together. But yeah, we do focus on books that, uphold these values of, obviously, diversity and inclusion, and specifically queer representation. And one thing that's been great is there has been a big growth in that field in the last few years. 10 years ago, it would have been very hard to find LGBT inclusive kids books. There were things like Heather Has Two Mommies. Like, there were a few of them, but it was very rare. But in the last few years, and I think Drag Queen Story Hour around the country has played a big part in that, as we've created spaces to read those kind of books. There are a lot of really great books, like Entango Makes Three, which is the story of the same-sex penguin couple at the Brooklyn Zoo that adopted an egg based on a true story. There's a great book called, and I'm forgetting all the authors now. There's a great book called Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag, that talks about the creation of the Rainbow Flag at the Pride Festival in the 70s. So there are a lot of specific, queer inclusive books that we try to include. There's the famous Marlon Bundo book that John Oliver published as a troll on Mike Pence. We read that at our first event. We just did a pet centered story hour on Saturday for National Puppy Day. We read it there as well. But we also do try to include books as well that are focused on themes of things like anti-racism and inclusion there. We've done a bilingual story hour, and we've been working to make that more a part of our programming going forward. We did a Dia de los Muertos event last year, which we're hoping to make an annual thing. So we're trying to also focus on, inclusion of, all types of marginalized communities, and, focusing on these values of not just sort of general diversity, but specifically, anti-racism, anti-sexism, all of those things. And so like I said, we're in a really good time right now for that. There are a lot of these really great books, but there's still a lot of controversy. There's, the American Library Association does their list of the most banned and challenged books every year. And the one for last year, like, of the top 10, over half of them were books for youth, either kids books or young adult books that included LGBT content. And that was the main reason they get challenged in schools, is the LGBT content. So we're trying to bring those books to a wider audience.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'll just plug in there. Anybody wants more on this, our website, dragstoryhour.az.org, we have a whole list of the books that we've read. We also have a list of books specifically for parents, resources there, books about raising, trans youth and things like that. So definitely check that out.
Perfect. Thank you for plugging that, because we had questions about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been putting a lot of the links in the chat. So I put in your Facebook page, dragstoryhouraz.org, where you can check out the list of those books and things like that. Let's see. So that's like one of the really awesome things that you do. I love Drag Story Hour. It's so crucial, and yet I think it also must be so difficult when you get so much pushback. Because there's like it's really, I think it's super upsetting to see how people don't understand why this is important and why this is amazing and why this is needed. And yeah, I think that it's definitely amazing that this has persevered despite the fact that so many people are like don't understand. Because I think it's just like really essential that we have queer representation in books, that we are having kids get to meet drag performers. Yeah, I think, and it's just one of those things that I look at it and I think like, wow, that's just like so cool. And I really wish that I had like seen, that when I was younger. So getting to go to some of those events and like see how excited the kids are and how great the drag performers are with the kids is just like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And that's the thing, like so much of what I do, is trying to just present the stuff that I wish I would have had, when I was a kid as well. So much. And and the protesters, we have, had protested events. We've had events canceled. We had an event scheduled at Mesa Community College that the president of the college overrode all proper authority and canceled. And we moved it to Scottsdale Community College instead. But then also with the protesters, I always like tell the story. Our very first event was actually at the Chandler Library downtown. It was not in affiliation with the library. We rented a room as a private event. It wasn't affiliated with them, but we had a whole bunch of protesters turn out. But they also can turn into really good publicity. We had people coming off the street because they wanted to know what the commotion was, and then they found out about the event and they came and watched the story hour. So that's always my favorite part, is when the protesters turn into advertising for us.
That's really ironic and actually amazing. That's awesome. So Drag Story Hour is one of the other amazing things you do. And then one of the things that I was actually able to participate in was Virtual Pride AZ. And it's been this ongoing amazing thing that has been born out of, the pandemic. And it's so great to hear that you want to continue doing virtual events, even after quote unquote things sort of return to normal. Because it's like you said, there are a lot of people that might not be able to attend in-person Pride celebration. So being able to expand that out so that more people can celebrate Pride is fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about Virtual Pride AZ.
Yeah, it's still very much, we're coming up on our anniversary, obviously. We're all in the middle of pandemic anniversaries right now, as we, come up in March here. We're still very much figuring out what we want to be. But the essential idea, what we did for the first event last April was very simple. We got all of as many sort of performers and nonprofits and organizations in the community, and basically said, if you want to do an event, whether that is a virtual drag show on Facebook Live, or that is a Zoom discussion, or training education event, which Glisten did, anything like that, we sort of brought them together. We set up a website, we published a schedule, we did put stuff on Facebook, and just tried to kind of guide people to these events, make it easy to find them. There were, of course, this time last year, lots of people, everybody was moving online, obviously. The drag performers, of course, that was, and the DJs, anyone who, was a live performer. This, of course, has been devastating, and they were moving to doing virtual events, and we just wanted to publicize them as much as possible, get people to to those events, get people tipping virtually through PayPal to support them. And so, yeah, we've done drag shows, we've done, virtual DJ sets, we've done concerts, we've done, history panels with Marshall Shore, the hip historian and the head of the Arizona LGBT History Project. Did the event with you about your work. And yeah, we really just want to provide a virtual space, whether, for everybody in the community to present their work in a virtual way. And it's been a very learning experience, for us and for the organizations, and like what things work online and how you have to change it, to be in a virtual space. But yeah, we've done that. We've done for June last year, for Juneteenth, we produced our first kind of event that we did ourselves. Felicia Miner and Shannon McKenzie from Charlie's Phoenix, they co-produced a Juneteenth drag show. I think we had about, I think it was close to 24 of our, Black drag performers from the area doing virtual, drag performances that were all Juneteenth oriented, which was really awesome. Coming up this year, we started doing, we kind of, not even quite sure how we landed on this, but we fell into doing third Saturday kind of as our day. And we're doing every other month for 2021, doing our virtual events. And so we're doing one on April 17th. That'll be our anniversary show. So we're going to have programming from a lot of our organizations, our partners, and then we're going to do a kind of panel discussion in the evening that day with a bunch of people who have been part of Virtual Pride, just talking about this year of doing events online. We also do things like, we've done these video projects, asking members of the community to shoot short videos that we put up online on Facebook and on YouTube. We started that last June, just doing sort of what we called messages of pride. And so we had people in the community, but we also got Kate Gallego, Kathy Hoffman, Greg Stanton did one. We had a lot of allies of the community just do little messages about what pride means to them. We are doing, for this month, for Women's History Month, we've had people doing videos for that as well. We've had Taylor Renee, the performer, just did one. I'm blanking now who else did it. But you can go to our Facebook page, our YouTube, they're all up on there. You can check those out. And yeah, just trying, to keep the community connected as best as possible, through this time. And, like I said earlier, looking for spaces for, things that, even when the in-person Pride comes back, which will hopefully be in November, knock on wood, Phoenix Pride will be back. In October, Tucson will hopefully be doing their event again in person. Providing spaces for things you don't necessarily get there, for some of the educational programming. I know I was talking to Marshall Shore. One thing that he really liked about it was he's like, it's much more intergenerational than the in-person Pride tends to be. There were older and younger people actually mixing and talking to each other in a way that often doesn't happen at in-person Pride events. And yeah, so I'm really excited to see where we go with it. It's been very much making it up as we go along, because obviously all of this has been unprecedented over the last year, but it's been really fun. And I've got to work with a lot of really awesome people. Our sort of core team, like I mentioned, Felicia Miner, who I think everybody probably knows if you are in Arizona in the LGBT community at all. Shannon McKenzie, Shannon Black from Free Mama Hugs, Christopher J. Hall, aka Miss Nature, who is also involved in Drag Story Hour, great performer, based down in Tucson, and we've worked with, all these great organizations, from Glisten to Phoenix Pride to 1 in 10, and Equality Arizona, HRC, and got to meet just really great people, many of whom I've become very close with, but I've never actually met in person because we've done it, all virtually this last year.
I think it's so cool how, obviously it was like started out of a horrible situation with COVID, but I think that it's so awesome how it's been able to bring the community together in different ways that weren't happening before. And I'm excited to see that continue. Alrighty. Well, And it's, yeah, Tiffany asked, what would be different about this year, and you kind of covered a lot of like the upcoming events. So those are super exciting to look forward to. And if you haven't seen it already, go check out Virtual AZ Pride. I put the link to their website in the chat.
Website does need updating, so we'll work on that. We're gonna be putting up the April stuff very soon, so coming soon. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So watch this space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if you missed my Virtual AZ Pride stream, I did a event or like a live stream about my top surgery zine. So I made a zine last year called I Just Had to Get Something Off My Chest. And it sort of takes you on the journey with me of getting top surgery and what that's like. You can get that on my website, by the way, judeschroder.com, if you haven't seen it already.
And I'll just say,
I think
it's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should definitely check it out. It's awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It was my first scene, and I think I'm super proud of how it turned out. So with that, we covered a lot of really cool things. If you weren't aware today, I hope that those of you watching have learned about a new resource or a new organization, something fun for you to look forward to this year. I want to thank David again for joining us for this conversation. You have been an amazing second guest on our Chandler Pride Project series. So if you want to just say some final words before we end the stream.
That went super fast. It's already 7 o'clock. I said at the beginning I was going to get talking and probably take up a lot of the time. I just want to reiterate, Jude and Eduarda, who started Chandler Pride. Known both of them for a while now. A couple of folks I've had the privilege of getting to know through all of my work. And I was super excited when they started Chandler Pride, as I said earlier, as someone who grew up in this area. When we did our first story hour at Chandler Library, that was a big thing for me personally, just because of that, coming from that area and being able to provide that kind of programming. And I'm just really excited that you all are, taking that forward in this area in particular and working to make Chandler a more inclusive place. Because we need it. This is a community that's still, difficult, I think to grow up in, particularly, as a queer youth. And so I'm just really excited to see where Chandler Pride goes in the future.
We are too. We're super excited to be tackling the issue of creating a more diverse and inclusive space in Chandler. And we're so glad that we have friends and resources like you to help us along our journey. So we really appreciate it, David. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in, for participating in the chat. Share this with your friends if they weren't able to catch it live. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel. And if you aren't already, subscribe. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thanks.
Have a good night.